Order the work session of December 10th, 2014 here in Assembly Hall. The first item of general business we have is a review and approval of the 2025 Key Partners and Collaborators assignments. I'll just ask one question and then we can go in discussion. Is there anything different here than the last one we've seen?
No, this is the same assignments.
Okay, let's just do one little due diligence, everybody, and see if there's anything here that's, I don't see anything.
Only issue, and it's not really an issue, the Central Pines Regional Council. Dr. Morgan is actually an officer on that board. I did attend one meeting, but it was the meeting where they told me that I couldn't vote because Pinehurst was part of the SMPO rather than Pinehurst Regional. So I just...
Well, that might be worthwhile not to have your name there for that.
Probably.
Yes.
Yeah, there's two separate issues. So there's the Central Pines Regional Council, which we are a member of, and then there's the Central Pines Rural Planning Organization, which we are
RPO.
not part of.
Okay.
My only question, Pat, would be, do you want to be the liaison for the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, to be the sole person there?
Well, I
mean, it doesn't sound like you've got much to do.
no, I don't. So I don't know if someone else wants to take that on, but we are. I think we're going to have a larger BPAC, as it's known in the trade. So if, I would hand it off or co-attend with folks if someone wants to add their name to that. Jack, you're quite the biker, aren't you? This
Well,
is bicycles,
I have
not
been
motorcycles, Jack.
I have been to a few meetings, yes, correct,
Okay.
in the past. I would be happy to join with you if you
Yeah,
want.
let's add Jack to that then. And
Are we able to produce a consolidated calendar of when all these meetings are so that you can decide to attend them even if you're not formally assigned?
We do not have one in existence, but we could try. Some of these I don't know if
They
they
may not
have.
meet regularly, but
Yeah, right. So for the ones that do meet regularly, we can pull that together.
let me just clarify that. You're talking about our village meetings, or are you talking about all of them?
I'm talking about when these groups meet, if they meet on a regularly scheduled
Okay.
basis, so that even though I'm not part of Pinehurst Business Partners, I might go to the meeting and just listen.
All right, then that would be, if we can put that together, that might be helpful to share.
And if they don't meet regularly, then not much we can do, so.
And I noticed the only one we have, what we collaborate on, blank, is the National Park Service. Shouldn't we put in something there?
Yeah, we could put something like the historic district and
Okay. Jack, you have any other thought?
And landmark status.
yeah, landmarks. Yeah.
Historic district landmark status, okay.
I would move to approve the 2025 Key Partners and Collaborators assignments
With the addition of
With the edits.
with the addition of,
Jack Farrell as council liaison to BPAC.
yes.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second?
Second.
Aye.
Adopted. Thank you. And good that we went through that. Item B, review summary of decisions from the fiscal year 26 council retreat. So let us get to our little books here. Okay. All right, Doug, is there somewhere how you would like to
Well, we
handle
could
this, or?
we could do it the long way or the short way. So the long way would be me reading all of them, but I think you've already done that, so I don't think that's probably the best course of action. The mayor, you sent out an email that had most of the same recommendations or takeaways from the meeting. So
Yeah.
I would actually just open it up. Are there any questions or concerns, anything you thought I didn't get exactly right, and then we can amend it?
I had two.
Yep.
Maybe three, but 3.2, it says, still will continue to explore. I thought that might have been staff, but I wasn't sure. I didn't know.
Bad word choice, but staff will continue to explore, yeah.
8.3, approval of further holidays. I thought we had, by consensus, agreed to add Juneteenth, but
Yeah,
we need to do that
I
formally.
think I had asked some questions about other ones. I raised Columbus Day and, so.
yeah, we plan on bringing a policy change or a policy recommendation forward to the council to address that.
And finally, 3.1, I plan to introduce the concept of a parking structure again. Obviously, it's dropped off our capital list. I want to get it back on so that we're talking about it. That doesn't mean we're going to make a proposal because it's going to take some time. But other than that, I had no other comments.
Trying to remember. I had a couple. I hope probably right here. Yes, here it is. On 2.8, where you have NA, is NA not applicable? What does NA stand for?
Yeah, so in that section, we didn't actually we didn't have a proposed topic to discuss.
Okay.
But when the goal came up, you mentioned to increase the littering.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can add my name after NA in parentheses. The 4.2, let me see if I got this right. Scribble down date of next meeting. Nope, I can't make sense of my note. So
Well, that you brought that up, so the BPAC meets quarterly, and they will meet in January.
Oh.
I think we will push the meeting to the last Monday in January. I forget the actual date, maybe the 29th, just so we have an opportunity to appoint the members at the January meeting, and then they can attend the meeting.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for filling in my chicken scratch. The 5.3, offer CDMAP to neighborhoods. I thought we exchanged some emails on this about the West Pinehurst Park also to be included, not just the neighborhoods, so might make a note of that for our discussion.
Yeah, is that something council wants me to move forward on? There was a discussion about tree stands, things like that. Since it's our property, we can control it, and we can say
Yeah.
whether or not we want them or
Well,
not, which I think
Yeah,
we
one
do.
of the things I wanted to find out is, what are these tree stands, or what is that, is there a cost and so forth, so we can have a discussion at a future meeting if that works. And also if Dr. Morgan's here at the time, it might be
Sure,
fair.
we can, yeah.
And, I
So
mean,
on that, would any hunting of deer be coordinated with the deer season, which won't occur again until next fall? Is that true?
So they can extend the season for certain areas if we do the
Okay, I
CDMAP
see.
program.
They
So
have-
it could go, February or
Wildlife
March if we
Commission has the
wanted.
ability to grant that. Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
The only other item I had a little note on is 7.2 on the survey process. I think there was some confusion as to what we did or didn't agree to. My notes were that we were going to move the community survey to every other year, and that we were going to, you have here bring business survey in-house. I took that to mean that we wouldn't be doing a business survey except by our staff.
Yeah,
Is
that's
that-
what I meant.
Okay.
And the same every other year schedule.
I wasn't clear that we had actually decided to only do the community survey every other year. If we shorten it and make it more germane, maybe it's worth doing every year. I don't feel strongly about that, but I don't want to do.
I would like us to shorten it and try to make it more germane. I still question whether the need to do it every year, but I'm open to, but I'd like to hear what everybody else says.
I think my comment was, I would like to hear what staff has to say, because your KPIs and action plans and everything are so much based on the results of that survey. Would we be losing something if we don't have it every year.
I think some are, but not all.
Yeah, and I think what we would do is look at other KPIs and maybe rise them up to council-level KPIs that are a little more quantitative, that we can measure a little more frequently than just once a year when the survey goes out. So I am comfortable moving to every other year. That would be my recommendation, but, you know, if we want, as a next step, what we could do is trim it down, get it to what we think is a more reasonable number of questions, and we can discuss it again at that point, and then say, you know, if we send this out every year, or should we do this every year or every other year?
So my only other question, if we do it every other year, can we send out more surveys?
We can send out as many as we want, as
Well, we were talking about getting more responses than the 700 that we typically get, and so that might be an opportunity to do that.
All right, so it sounds like we got some
The
clarity.
incremental increase in statistical accuracy is marginal over a certain number of responses. I just thought I'd point that out.
yeah, I mean, it is typically a margin of error like 3.5% and 95% confidence level. You'd have to like double or triple the number of responses we get to make that significantly different.
I guess the margin of error is one thing, but I guess the larger the response may make us feel a little more comfortable with the data we're looking at.
Well,
So
not if you
along your
believe
lines.
statistics, so.
No, I'm just, the margin of error is one thing, but I don't know if I really don't look at the margin of error too much in
Yeah.
this survey. It's not like a political survey. It's a,
And the nature of some of the questions is such that, you know, I may feel differently than my neighbor, and while they say if we send out 3,000, that should come out in the wash, I'm not 100% sure it always does. And if the right subset is talking about lighting, and they say, no, we don't want any more lighting, or yes, we want a lot more lighting, and you get more of a swing year to year in that because we are sampling, we're not surveying everyone, and even if we did, everyone wouldn't send a response back anyway. So even if we don't get more statistically valid sample, I'd love to have 1,200 responses
yeah.
or 1,100 than 700.
yeah, I agree with that. So if we
Yeah.
can think in those terms.
Sure. So next step, I will take our existing survey and, you know, trim it down and give us a sample to start looking at.
Yeah.
And at that meeting, we can discuss how frequently we want to
Yeah.
do it.
Sounds like a plan.
We don't have a guarantee with ETC for a certain number of surveys per year or anything like that, do we?
The number is not issued.
With ETC, you wouldn't have a contract that says we will.
We do have a contract with them, but I am guaranteed they'll be flexible with us.
Okay.
Yeah, because we may, in the past, we once went out for a special survey, so we may have those, that may develop again in the future.
Would we still have them compiling the results even if we substantially alter the nature of the survey itself?
Yeah, they'd give us the same survey materials back to us. We also have the raw data. We can look at it any way we want.
Okay. All right, anything else on this item? Team? No? Okay, so that moves us to item C, the 2026 fiscal year strategic operating draft 5-year forecast discussion. I guess, Dana, you're joining us?
One other point while Dana comes up on deer, I did speak to my friend who's on the POA at Forest Creek, and who confirmed largely what we thought about restricted to communally owned land and so forth. And they don't do a lot of it, but they do it. So.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. We're going to talk through first, I figured some of the background, the methodology, and some of this key items that are included in the draft of the forecast based on what was discussed last week at the retreat. And then we can dive into any questions you may have and any of the numbers in specific, more specifically. And overall, the methodology includes 5-year projections of revenues, operating expenditures, debt service, and capital, incorporates any revenues or costs, including cost savings associated with the IAPs and OFEs that are on in the plan for the 5 years. The revenues are forecast line by line by the major, accounts that we have. And those typically, for the most part, are just projecting a percentage increase year over year, and then any plus or minus any adjustments that we know of. For example, including an estimated U.S. Open license fee in 2029 for the back-to-back men's and women's championships. Salaries and benefits are, more than half of our budget. So those are key items that are included in there. Right now, the forecast includes adding 1 FTE for the library and archives in FY26 when the new library is expected to open, reducing a half FTE in inspections in FY26, adding 1 FTE in buildings and grounds in FY26, adding 3 FTEs for the library and archives in 2027 when the renovated archives open. That would bring the library and archives up to the full staffing that we've been expecting to need once both buildings are completed. And 9 FTEs for fire in FY 2030 when the new fire facility would open, assuming that stays in the plan as it is now. And with that, even though you have not, the Birdie results are not complete yet with a recommendation that's been presented to you, we, for now, included basically the most costly option in the forecast so that you can see sort of the, I don't want to call it worst case scenario, but financially worst case in terms of what would be most costly at this point until a recommendation is presented. But just know that the team is considering other less costly options that are still on the table.
The FTEs incorporate, the appropriate manager and levels of salary?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, 2 quick questions. Why are we reducing the FTE by a half for inspections? Why does that make a difference?
There's an expectation that a part-time inspector will retire. Is that correct?
I think he's full-time now, but he'll retire and come back part-time.
Is that
okay, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so it has to do with the arrangement of someone in place. I got it. All right, second question is, at the last, maybe it was at the strategic retreat, I think it was when Jack opined about the need for a full-time archivist. So when we look at FTEs for library and archives, are we pricing them separately as what would it be a full-time archivist versus what would be additional staff?
Not at this point. We hadn't gotten that specific in terms of defining a role for an archivist separate from other
Might want to give that some
library
thought.
staff. And what the salaries that we were projecting for those FTEs were also blended to some extent, knowing that those could be the work the staffing that's needed could be done through a combination of full-time and part-time staff. So that's something we can look at more closely. I think especially as conversations continue with Audrey in really fleshing out the plan and timeline of everything that needs to happen throughout that project, I think that is when that will really come more into focus in determining exactly what type of staff are needed.
But
That's the right answer. We need to have a more well-defined plan that we can develop over the next X number of months that foresees the staffing requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
I was just going to add that first bullet is the position that Jack was talking about that we had already built in as an additional employee. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else on this page?
Yeah, well, I don't know it's exactly on this page or not. I think we asked Dana a week ago, when we come to the next tax revaluation, it appears that you're building in sort of a maybe 2% inflation annually, but no stair-step revaluation there.
Correct. So we assume 1% kind of just flat increase in the valuation year over year. And then I did add on top of, and that's kind of based on historically over a number of years on average what kind of the normal growth rate is with development. But because of phase 5, I think it might be on the next slide, with phase 5 being built during, or expected to being built in the next 5 years, I did add those in more specifically. So that's not, or that's on top of the regular 1% growth that's happening.
And maybe leading you into that, the 40 homes and 38 homes you're assuming in fiscal 27, 28, that conforms with the plan that Pine Wild has, or Pine Wild's developer?
Yes. So from discussions with the developer that have happened, they intend to start building 40 homes per year, basically for 10 years between phase 5 and then phase 4.
And this does not really assume any development either in Pinehurst South or in a Village Place.
Correct. There's no additional assumption on top of the normal growth rate for
Great,
that.
thank you.
Yep. And it is, while we're on the topic of Pine Wild, Mr. Farrell did ask a question and point out, and Alex confirmed it, there's actually now only going to be a total of 77 homes in phase 5. Certainly does not really make a difference in the outcome of the forecast in the big picture, but I will correct that for the next version that we look at. And in the forecast, we are assuming that Pine Wild Phase 4 is not annexed. Obviously, if it were, that would be a pretty significant increase in the valuation over time as that's built. But for now, we did not include that. For capital expenditures, it's what's been included in the 2025 fleet, IT, and other capital CIP plans. For 2030, we just do an average of the 5 years capital expenditures as an estimate for that additional year, because we don't have detailed replacement schedules for that year yet. In the forecast will be updated and refined as we work through the SOP process. In February and March, that's when we're getting the department-specific requests and working through the FY25 mid-year projections, so it will be updated over time as we work through the process. Some of the other changes compared to the FY 2025 5-year forecast, that is the starting point for it. The beginning fund balance has been updated to be the actual FY24 ending fund balance from the ACFR. The FY25 column has been updated to what is the current budget as amended, which includes $1.9 million in reappropriation for expenditures in total between operating and capital. Because of the salary study being done for all employees this year, we did include an estimate that overall salaries will increase 5% as a result of the salary study, and that then reflected that in the associated benefits that are driven by salaries. That then compounds onward in the subsequent years with COLA and merit. The USGA economic incentive payments, which we're estimating to be about $25,000 per year, we're assuming that they will begin in FY26. We have not heard officially from the USGA yet on their declaration of when will be the first year of the incentive payments in accordance with the agreement. But for now, we're assuming that it will start in the first year that they would be eligible.
Is that close to their assessed valuation versus the tax rate?
Their assessed valuation as of now is not anywhere near the $25 million commitment that's in the agreement. It's about $12 million. That doesn't include any of the personal property The business personal property, which 2020, the 25 tax year will be the first year they're required to list that and report that.
Okay,
But I would be surprised if it's that much.
It's just less money we're giving back to them.
Correct.
but they've fulfilled the obligation relative to the employment.
Correct, yes. And from my read of the agreement, there is no penalty or nothing that happens if they don't meet the $25 million commitment in terms of assessed value that's added to the tax rolls. But yes, we haven't heard official reporting from them yet, but from what has been in the pilot and other sources, I think they're meeting those, the employment and wage requirements that are in there.
Off the track, because I know you got bigger numbers here to worry about.
This was an item that was discussed, the next one's an item that was discussed at the retreat, potential agreement with county EMS to build an addition onto Fire Station 91 that would include an additional bay and office and, not lounge space, what's the best word?
Break room.
Break room type of space, yes, thank you. So we have an estimate of $100,000 for site plan and design in FY '26 and $1 million for construction in FY '27. We did not include an assumption for what the county may contribute toward capital costs without really knowing.
Do you have an idea of the square footage of the construction?
So there was, Carlton had provided, was it from 2 years ago or so? 2017, you said? Oh, sorry. So from 2017, an estimated 5,000 square feet, but that was with 2 bays. So that was with 2 bays instead of only 1.
I'll say this, we're talking here a 1 bay, so it's
Let's say
more than 3,000.
3,500.
2,500 to 3,000.
Yeah.
Probably 3,000.
Maybe a little bit more, but I would say 3,500. But, you know, I'm also not a trained architect.
that extra bay is just 1,500.
Yeah, right.
And
To the extent that we have lots of other things already present in Station 91, this is largely a box that's being tacked on so that there's space for whatever vehicle or vehicles need to be housed there. All the personnel and administrative, that's already exists and would not need to be expanded.
So on the Station 91 right over here, the lot that we own next to it, we'd build the bay next to our existing bays, and then on the opposite side of the bays would be the office and break room, a couple of offices. So there's not a lot of
Okay.
space,
Now-
but it's more than just a bay.
And this would be offsetting the EMSA Pinehurst Rescue Squad building, which has a couple of bays at least in the back. I don't know if I call it a storage area or a repair area, but
Yeah,
So-
they have some office space there as well, and break room.
right, I've been in it. Okay. Okay, so that's sort of a contingency issue, but helpful. Thank you.
all right, and then in FY '26 and '27, we did increase the planned transfers to the Library Expansion Capital Project Fund. It's by $400,000 total, $200,000 in each year, based on kind of revised cost estimates for the archives. And we talked about Phase 5. And then this is more detail on the fire facility assumptions in FY '30. So that includes additional salaries, operating expenditures, and debt service, which total $1.7 million in that first year. It assumes that we're borrowing $9 million of the total project cost of approximately $10 million. And a 2-cent tax increase is included to cover the majority of the new operating costs. It actually is not the full amount. It's more like 2.5 cents. But that would be, initially we would put in 2 cents.
Pinewell Phase 4, if you're assuming no annexation, then we obviously cannot assume any property tax revenue from those homes.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, and then this is a summary. The materials do have the full detail that's included in the SOP book, but this is a summary of the results of the forecast at this point, given all of those assumptions. The main thing, two key metrics that we look at are the fund balance as a percentage of the total budget. Our policy is that that should be 30% at a minimum. And the operating margin, we want to typically have in the range of 89 to 91%, or 0.89 to 0.91. So the operating margin really is the more critical issue that we would need to kind of remedy through the SOP process in refining this forecast. The revenues in the forecast are growing at about 1% per year, and expenditures are growing at about 4 to 5% per year. So obviously, that causes a problem.
I know this is a semantic question that we've gone over before, but normally when margins are expanding, that's a good thing. Here, it's a bad thing.
Yes, we call it operating margin, but it's not really your traditional calculation of operating margin.
The 1 minus this number is what I would think of as the actual margin.
Yes, so this is, that ratio is the percentage of operating revenues that are being used to fund operating expenditures. Yes.
Now, if you were to look back several years and on previous 5-year financial forecasts, how did it turn out from the forecast to the actual? Because obviously the 0.92 and 0.93 were off by a penny and 2. But my recollection is that in the past, it ended up that we became whole as to what happened in reality. So, I mean, you may not know it off the top of your head, but I would be curious to look back and see how things changed from forecasts to actuals, because I think that's an important part for us as we plan here. The 28.2% on the fund balance percentage of total budget, my hunch is that all gets well, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah, that's very close.
Now, the FY30, 17.4%, and is much larger, so I wouldn't do that. But I would be curious to look at a few of the forecasts versus actuals, so we get a sense of how that number moves by the end of a year. I mean, obviously we want to be conservative when we forecast, which is understandable, but we still need to look at the actuals to get a good grasp as to what becomes the final end that we put to rest when we close the books. And I don't think we've ever, even if we financially forecasted us in the red, we ever were in the red.
That's probably correct. From looking back, I don't think we've had an operating margin that has gone over the 0.91 kind of guideline as far as the upper level limit that we want on that. I have not specifically compared the forecast to the actuals in terms of what the forecast originally was in the 5-year forecast till it actually came to fruition in that year goes. But I have looked at historically our budget to actual variance trends, which is going to be similar. And in terms of the budget to actual variance that we estimate in here, and it is included in the operating margin estimates there, we assume that expenditures are only 91% of the budget. Over time, that is pretty accurate. We're basically typically at about 10% over the last, I think I looked at 7 years since 2018.
So if you were to
6 years.
apply that 10%, how would that change those numbers?
It's favorable, of course. Actually, I can drop
I'm
it
actually
in right
curious
now.
now
It
that
actually, I believe changing that makes FY20, it makes it good through FY28.
On the operating margin?
On the operating margin, let me see.
And we want to be a little bit careful because we do assume that we are not going to spend all the money every year anyway, but what
Yes.
Kate is saying that we spend even less than we had built into
Right.
assumptions, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not by much. It actually, it does not move the operating margin very much. It does help the fund balance percentage more. It brings 2029, that 28.2, it does bring that up over 30%. But as far as the operating margin.
It doesn't bring it down a
It doesn't
penny?
really move that very significantly. And I think really the addition of FTEs, right, we're adding 3 FTEs in FY '27 with no tax increase planned. You know, something like that is difficult for the operating budget to absorb, and that's really a year where you start to see it creep up, you know, kind of out
Even
beyond.
if we're adding FTEs, if we're still lapsing at 13 to 15%, we're more than covering whatever that
Right, but
differential would
it
be.
will get a little worse.
It could, and it's definitely gonna make it worse. We budget in here that we're, you know, we assume, or we budget for 100% employment for the
Right.
year. Obviously, in here, we estimate the budget to actual variance, knowing that we will not actually spend every dollar. Every position will not be filled for the entire year, even if we wish it could be that way. So there are some things that we can do to make adjustments, and of course, we do know that at the end of the day, we will not spend every dollar that we have forecasted in here. I would be hesitant to increase that budget to actual variance assumption much higher, as opposed to maybe finding where are some meaningful places that we can
Right,
reduce what we're planning for.
This is based on no spending reduction at all versus what we have in the wish list. So that
Correct.
alone will change these numbers, as we've seen in the past exercises of,
I also want to bring up that during a reval year, we typically adjust for inflation at that point, so that'll be a discussion we need to have at that point.
and pinpoint precisely when we would have that reval year
That
discussion.
will be FY '28.
So we will be having that in the spring of '27.
Correct. Yep, spring of '27, we'll have the revaluation numbers and be resetting the tax rate at that point based on the results of the revaluation.
Okay, that's important. Thank you.
Obviously, we reset the tax rate every year, or at least consider it, but that's
That's the big year.
certainly a more meaningful, or
And
a
then
more
the-
involved one, I
And then
should
the
say.
tax bills on the property, we'll receive those in August of '27, though.
Yes,
Obviously, not,
Calendar 27, yeah.
theory not due till January 1st or something like that.
correct.
But we
Yep.
will be getting that revenue in '27. The calendar year '27.
Yes, during, calendar year '27, which is fiscal year '28 for us, yes. The dates get very confusing.
Dana, the population estimates that you have, they don't explicitly drive anything, correct?
Oh, correct. I'm sorry, I forgot to hide those on there. Darn
I
it.
told her to hide them, so, but yeah, no,
Doug
they don't.
did. We
they
talked
don't
about this
mean
because
anything.
they don't drive anything in the forecast. They're there for informational purposes, but I did recognize after the retreat that we're forecasting the, FY '29 population was forecasted to be more than the 20,095 that was presented during the retreat as the more realistic projected FY 2040 population. I apologize, I missed hiding it on this slide.
Apart from this specific exercise, when we are asked by SMPO or DOT or more, DOT, I guess, to update population forecasts, actually, where do these numbers come from to begin with, the numbers that you're showing? And although those forecasts will be for a longer period of time, they'll be out 20 or 25 years, should they, this is the 5-year rate of growth is a little over 1.4% a year. Seems very reasonable to me. But some of the other numbers that we've seen, statewide numbers, are a much higher rate of growth than that, which I don't think we will see for various physical constraint reasons. Will there be any relationship between these and what we end up forecasting?
No, this is just part of the spreadsheet that Dana uses. I think we need to have a much broader discussion about the population projections in the future, so And that should include, you know, potential new development as well as potential annexations and all that stuff that
Okay.
will play into those numbers.
Outside the scope of this tonight, so, okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yes, and we will certainly make sure that what is presented in here is consistent with whatever numbers, what population numbers are used for those purposes. We wouldn't want there to be.
1.4% is a pretty,
I forget what the
Average.
average was, but it's about that.
yeah, so it's not a,
It's in line with Moore County historically. It is not in line with some of the projections that other agencies are making. But
Right.
yes, by itself, I don't have no quibble with 1.4.
no, I think those appear to be very sensible numbers.
Yeah.
But as John has mentioned, when asked, we're going to have one number, so to speak, that we are all in agreement on. So I consider that a very helpful number. Thank you.
Yep, so I think through the budget development process that will happen in the new year, I think and kind of fleshing out the forecast, I think that operating margin really is going to be the number that we focus on to try to get back in compliance with our guidelines, not a formal policy per se as far as how high we want that number to go, excuse me, but basically, if we get that operating margin more in line with our expectation and our guideline, then that will significantly help resolve the fund balance that goes below 30%. Because effectively, by improving the operating margin, by spending less of the current year's operating dollars coming in on operating expenditures, it means then we're able to fund more capital from the current year's revenues and less out of fund balance. If we look at this revenues over under expenditures, let me go up to this full one here. It's a better place to look at it because it has this the operating income number here. This is before applying that budget to actual variance assumption. But the way you can kind of eyeball after factoring in the budget to actual variance, where are we at and how that operating margin is really tightening as we move through the forecast, is if you add together the operating income number and this budget to actual variance number. At the end of the day, that is then what is kind of the true operating.
So when you say income, you mean operating revenues number?
The operating income, it's below the operating
Operating income
expenditures.
level, okay,
Yep.
I'm with you.
Yep. So this is where, when we get out to 2030, where it gets up to 0.97, we have 2.1 million in the negative, where expenditures are more than revenues by 2.1 million. And our budget actual variance assumption is 3 million. So we have, almost $900,000 that is true kind of operating income once we factor in the budget to actual variance, versus if you go back just a few years to what we're projecting in 2026, this is about 200,000. We have 2.4 million in kind of operating income that is then effectively paying for other financing uses and capital out of the current budget out of that current year's revenues. Where when you get to 2030, we're only really contributing 900,000 to $3.2 million of capital from that current year's revenues. So that's where really, then we're spending fund balance on capital, much more fund balance on capital than we did historically.
Dana, is this method of stating, is estimated operating margin a defined term either in GASB or according to the state?
No.
So we could report this the other way around. I have no idea how many of our citizens look at this, will look at it. I don't think it's a large number, but those who do, it might be easier.
Outside of this room?
That's
Yeah,
why-
probably none.
That's why we get paid the big bucks, John.
No, I
Yeah.
understand. I
When-
know two who probably will, but only two. I would just make the friendly suggestion, there might be, it's more common sense to look at it as it's a 9 to 11% target, and you're forecasting it could be 3 in fiscal.
Yeah.
That's a more logical way, common sense way for people to understand what's going on.
And I agree, when I first got here, I asked that question, I'm like, that's not operating margin. But once I understood the way it's been calculated here, then I'm like, okay, now I understand what it means here. But I agree, it is not a GASB term or ratio that's used or anything like that. I haven't seen it in other municipalities' financial reports or, budget reports that they put out, but I've, out of the ones that I've looked for other reasons.
But the state organization to whom we report our annual audit, and so they don't define it that way either, because I don't want to toy with that if
No.
they do. So.
Yeah, it's just something that we've defined internally. All right. So, any other questions on this portion of the forecast? If not, I have some discussion on the major capital that's included. So this is a list, Doug had this in the retreat materials last week as well. But just to recap, this is this is a summary of significant capital items that are in the CIP, in the forecast. I did add a column for the total cost estimate versus the cost that is in the 5-year CIP period that we're looking at, which is FY 26 through 30 for the upcoming budget year. The library and archives is really the only one where there's a difference, but I did want you to see basically the total budget that we're kind of looking at for that now versus what will need to be funded in 26 through 28.
So this emphasizes to me one of the biggest, if not the biggest, decision we have to discuss carefully is the new fire facility.
I would agree wholeheartedly.
Yep. All right. Any other questions or discussion on the items that are currently in this draft included in the forecast?
Actually, we have some things in here. I mean, I don't disagree with this statement, but from memory, we had round numbers, $29 million worth of capital needs, not counting what I would consider annual budget items, such as walkways and sidewalks. Yes, we're going to spend $2.3 million, and we need to look at this on a 5-year basis because that is baked in. But I kind of view that as a $460,000 a year operating expense, if you will, as opposed to a separate capital decision. Not to say that we couldn't change that number. Same way with roads. We asked a week ago, we asked Mike Apke about why 4 miles a year, not 3 or 5, and maybe someday we'll change that. But for now, he's comfortable. So, how did we go from? Am I misremembering 29, or how did we go, including some of those things, to 28 or a little under, despite having bumped up Fire Station 93 by $3 or $4 million?
And the fire station probably only had 400,000 in before. I'd have to look at what was included in the list that had 29 million.
We had a number for that, understanding that the
That was a
actual
design
expense
number.
was 3
The
or 4 years out in
400,000
the
was a
future.
design number.
Yeah. I can look back to see what was included in the 29 million. I don't
Yeah, I
remember
don't
anything off the top
remember
of my head.
When we can figure out what you're referring to, and then we can take a better look. I do sort of agree with you that like the walkways and the stormwater improvements, like, are they really capital because it's an ongoing operating budget item? But either way, we can figure it out.
When we get to other business, we'll revisit that question.
Yeah.
So.
It ends up as capital expenditures in the budget, and since my interpretation would be, since it's investments in new walkways and sidewalks and adding stormwater improvements, not just maintenance or repair of existing ones, is why it's on the capital side of things in terms of those decisions. But aside, I
think that's a good
can
reason to leave
understand
it,
also
yeah,
seeing that
yeah.
it's sort of a routine, if it's just become a routine investment that we make,
I think what I'm
in
saying is if
those
our fund
items.
balance was a lot smaller, we would still be allocating $460,000 a year for sidewalks. We might or might not be allocating some of the other numbers that are here.
And even the amount allocated for walkways and sidewalks is, it's not a guarantee, it's
No,
up to,
it's-
yeah,
it's-
it's a decision to be made with other
I
priorities.
believe that it was a year or two ago that we increased the per dollar amount each year from,
Yeah,
I think it was from
It was
400
400 and we bumped it
400 to
460.
450 or 460. So we have added to that, but we added to it in the operating costs of our budget. So, I don't,
I know, it's definitely as a capital expenditure. We happen to fund it more as an annual operating expense than building ordering a new pumper truck, something like that.
Right,
So,
yeah, it's more of a recurring item where progress is made year after year after year. There was an item last year for streetscape enhancements that was 200,000 that had been in the forecast for multiple years. And during last year's budget process, that was one where it was decided that FY '25 would be the last year of that funding. We weren't going to just assume 200,000 year after year after year
I know what the
anymore,
big item
given
is.
that there weren't any more specific projects known at the time.
the big
that-
item that's missing from this page is an estimated cost of the new maintenance facility
Oh, it's
at
public
$6
services.
million
Right,
or
yep,
whatever.
yes.
and there's no parking, and there was no parking facility either.
That wasn't on part of the
Yeah.
29. So.
What was the Camelot Playground on the last one?
Yeah, it was built into the last 5-year plan.
Yes.
Okay.
We've got
Yeah,
some other
it
things
was,
on the next
it was
page.
not, it was not on, at this point in the process during the retreat, strategic planning retreat process, but it was added during the budget development in the spring.
Of last year. So, okay, so that's when it got plugged in. Okay.
But that's pretty far out, like, and a lot can happen between now and then.
No, it is, but many of these are several years out, so. Which which always makes you question the number, though we've got bigger numbers now than we had in the past. I think that's to reflect some more accurate forecasting. I mean, at the last year's retreat, the fire ladder truck was 1.7, and it became 2.1.
But
So,
Dana has a nice slide showing how well she is now forecasting capital
Yeah,
expenditures.
it went up to 2.1 because I called Southern Pines and asked how much their truck was before getting the early, like the prepayment discount, so.
yes, right. Well, that's
And then
big
assumed some
difference.
inflation from there.
yes. Oh, yes. Well, I do think those couple of items, the one about the budget to actuals, I'll look forward to seeing that as sort of play with this in my mind.
Yep, I'll
And,
take,
what else on this? This is a draft forecast to sort of educate us and refresh our memories, and figure out what goes on next, so to speak. Okay, you've moved on to the not included, the long-term capital needs not included. I don't know if the word needs is the right word for these lists. I mean, I don't know if they're needs or is there another word, but let me, the multimodal golf cart paths of
Capital
3.4 million, rough order of magnitude. That's a big number.
so, yeah, so that is based on the total, I think it was about 6.7 or 6.9 million that Doug had presented at the retreat of the total estimated cost of the walkway, sidewalk, and multimodal golf cart path projects over the next 5 years, minus what,
What we have in earlier for the sidewalks.
Right.
Okay.
correct,
So
yeah.
this is
Minus
just-
what's funded in FY '25, because that total did include FY '25 projects. So minus what's funded in this year's budget and minus the 2.3 million that's anticipated in the forecast at this point in
Okay,
time.
go back to the ones with the unknowns. Um, why can't we have a rough order of magnitude of the cost estimate there? So that we have a number. I mean, I know it's a pretty big number, because we were kicking it around for a while.
Oh, yeah, 800,000.
Without beating a dead horse, and I wish Dr. Morgan were here because we talked about this a little week ago. This is why I think we need to have an October meeting for council, because we could have been discussing this and providing this input to Dana. This would have been, if there's anything wrong with what you've done, it's wonderfully detailed to the extent that you can. But we could have given you some input on whether to include that public services property or not. And that doing it on kind of an ad hoc basis throughout the year is not really in sync with the budget planning process of which this is a part.
I recall a number for public, well, this says purchase of public services property, but I thought we were dealing with a number of 5-point-something million when we were talking about.
Total
That was
expense
the,
of the
yeah,
building.
that was the total relocation.
Okay, so my mind's, okay, it's still clicking. So maybe we, instead of just say purchase, we substitute the words,
Wire.
yeah,
Yeah,
and put in a number, because otherwise we're still,
I think the reason why she did that is because we talked about, if we find property in the next 5 years, we'll actually purchase it, but we're very not likely to actually build a new public services building in the next 5 years. So,
well, that's, but yeah, but it's listed on the, what's your title on this? Not included. Oh, you're saying because it's not in the 5 years.
Not in the forecast, but it doesn't mean if the opportunity presents itself, we might not take advantage of it.
right, yeah.
So I do think we, make a rough order of magnitude cost estimate. You don't have to do it now, but, and the same on the Parks and Recreation Master Plan recommendations. I think we need to separate the master plan recommendations from West Pinehurst Park development. The Pinehurst Park development Pinehurst Park has been out there since, I think, 2001 or 2. It's at least 20-something years old. And where's the, and we've only done what we've done so far because it's just not that priority. As a matter of fact, if we look at the ETC survey results, it's one of the additional athletic fields and all always finishes pretty much last. But the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which we were presented last year by Angie, and Mark, I guess it was Mark Wagner actually presented it, and we adopted it or blessed it, I guess is the phrase. That was more specific to other things aside from West Pinehurst Park. Am I right? Is that I'm
you're-
working off memory without having.
You're right. Yeah.
Okay, then maybe we have
covers
2
it.
lines there.
Yeah.
And so it's more reflective of potential capital needs.
I think there are 2 pieces, West Pinehurst Park being one and everything else being the
Yes,
other. And,
absolutely, because their presentation went into a lot of detail on other things, and then West Pinehurst Park was a mention. So I would suggest that.
Or if there were items in the master plan recommendations that are for West Pinehurst Park,
And I would break those out. So
which bucket should those go in?
they should both be under potential capital needs,
Mhm.
and you should have one line for West Pinehurst Park development, and then one line for all the other parks. and
Okay, so
rec-
anything related to West Pinehurst Park,
Its own separate.
regardless of whether it was in the master plan or not,
Yes.
go in West Pinehurst
So
Park, okay.
at least we have a number we know that is out there.
And then the last one here is the parking facility downtown, with the rough estimate of 5 million. Okay. And then finally, I think to wrap up the discussion, are there any other long-term capital needs or projects, more generally, not necessarily needs, but capital projects or items that should be considered? Or anything that that was presented that you think should be potentially reprioritized, something that's in that should be out, something out that should be in, funding amounts, that we may need to look at changing?
I don't know if we want to make any, I'll call it decision for lack of a better word, any other decisions or guidance at this point, but I do think we need to come back shortly and have a full discussion, Dr. Morgan will be here, to decide some of these things and see how different decisions we make will affect your spreadsheet. Because I mean, we've done that in the past, because that will help us see financially what one decision does versus another.
I mean, I was happy to see some updated numbers on a third facility. On the other hand, we have a Birdie process that's taking place. I would have thought we would have wanted to complete it, but I'm never opposed to getting better cost estimates as we go along. The news is going to get delivered at some point. I'd rather it be sooner rather than
Well,
later.
obviously, we can't make a real determination until the Birdie process is complete.
Right.
We know it's going to take a couple more months, and that'll provide us a little more judgment. And in between that time, there may be new developments on the EMS issue, on the rescue squad, and all that, because there are discussions going on between staff and others about what possibly could change as to what we do. It would affect whatever we would end up utilizing the land acquired on Linden Road for a fire facility or emergency facility, whatever we want to call it, as well as impacting what we might do next to Fire Station 91 here. I don't know, I'm thinking out loud, I don't know if we're going to need to do both. Do we put on an addition to Fire Station 91 and then the property on Linden Road? Do we include that in a land swap with Moore County and make it more of an emergency response unit based on the preliminary data we know as to the percentage of fires versus the emergency
I wouldn't
responses?
brainstorm alternatives at this point in time, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I mean, those are things we are looking at in our Birdie process.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned that we could go down that rabbit hole of there's a million different alternatives.
Right. Well,
I'm looking for the fire station Birdie, if we'll call it that, to give us some direction as to whether or not it's advisable, recommended, or needed in some level of depth so that we can make a better decision in the spring.
fine with that.
So from here, what we will do is, in January, we start our department budgeting process. So all the department heads will submit their figures. Dana will put them all together, and then we have our meetings in March to kind of pare things down, put it all into one package. And we wanted to bring council in a little bit earlier in the process this year to, get your input before it's like, oh, this is finalized, here's the number, please approve it. So we'll do that probably in April.
Okay, if that's when you think it can be done. Obviously, if it's can be done sooner, to bring it sooner. You all,
Yeah, and they have until until February, end of February, to submit everything. So we don't have.
Yeah.
There's not that much time after that.
I would hope that the council can provide, tighter guidance, so you don't have to wait for a whole bunch of stuff while you're ready, so to speak. So the answer to these questions will be helpful, and anything that comes along, obviously, in addition to the Birdie, but anything else that comes along would also be helpful, so we can give you a little more guidance early, that's all.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. If there are any things that we're looking at, like, okay, does council really want this, and what we can come in between now and then. And the Birdie will be the biggest of all those.
But the primary work that you're doing is the one-year budget anyway. So in some sense, these capital needs, they can be massaged later, but we do need the one-year budget by the end of June.
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
we need to approve the one-year budget. That's what we officially do. But I do think I think it's important that we do, I don't like the word approve, or we get at least bless the 5-year financial forecast, because that helps you with next year's planning.
Correct.
And the following years.
Yeah.
And it's more of a snapshot in time, and
I found the page from the retreat book with the competing population figures that you pointed out. So I am interested in that because that has implications for us with our discussions with our SMPO and NCDOT and Moore County and all. So, thank you. Other questions or comments?
And
Dana,
so
is there
going
anything-
forward, staff departments will be putting together their generalized plan for next year, right? Staffing and requirements, capital and operating and so forth.
Yep,
And the first draft, which we'll see probably in the April timeframe.
April, yep,
Okay,
the first meeting in April.
Great.
8th, 9th, somewhere around there.
Just, so you know, they always ask for more personnel than we have built in, so
well,
that's,
sure, that's the name of the game.
We say no to some of them.
Well, that's it. You can
No, I don't need that much next year. Yeah.
you can say yes and then they don't show up, right? No, this has been very helpful, and it's very helpful to have it at this time of the year. So I do think we cleared up a few things, and looking for some additional information, but I found it very useful. And does anybody have, let me ask you, Dane, is there any question you want to ask us that we haven't blurted out?
Nope, I think we accomplished the goals for this evening of having this discussion and just seeing if there's any additional guidance you wanted to give us at this point. And I think I'm very happy that we're planning more touch points and discussions with you earlier on in the process, not just with the Birdie coming up in the next couple months, but I think if we also have time where there's opportunity to discuss some of the big capital items
Let me
or
ask you
staffing.
to do one other thing. Factoring in that there are two new administrations, one in Raleigh and one in Washington. You probably talk with other budget officials in the county and so forth. We need to be considerate to what changes might impact what happens to us. There may be no changes, but there may be some things that I know in the transportation area. I suspect there's going to be changes as to the amount of money that comes down to North Carolina from Washington. But I don't know if there's anything else that touches on our little world.
the vast majority is property tax revenue, so that's not going to change, but there are things, transportation, I think, is the most likely to be touched.
Right.
Yeah, there's nothing directly that comes to mind. Sales tax revenues are something I'm keeping an eye on, as is every other budget or finance official in the state, I think, with the fact that they are starting to drop pretty precipitously.
Okay.
We're down 5% this year over last year at this point. That's only with 2 months. That's with only July and August
Oh, that's right.
data so far. We
Fiscal.
should be getting September soon. But that is still better than some other counties and municipalities in the state, but overall the trend is starting to become where more are negative in terms of the year-over-year change than positive. And I think that is something that with change in administration or just the economy as a whole, that tends to be more sensitive to that in terms of people's spending.
And last item, is there an impact on us vis-a-vis what happened with Helene in Western North Carolina that you can discern or have been advised of?
Not that I can think of or that I've seen. We did have a police officer and several firefighters that went out and assisted, and we get fully reimbursed
We do get
through the
reimbursed.
state for the costs of their services and any equipment that they used and their travel time, things like that. But aside from that, I'm not aware of anything that would impact us as a result of that.
Okay, thank you. All right, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Dan.
You.
All right, we are now on item 3. If there is other business, I don't know if there's, John, do you have any other business?
I have one small piece of other business, but if I could, I'd like to defer till after the closed session for reasons that will become obvious
Okay.
when we get there.
Okay, so we have no other business at the moment. Having said that, we are, if someone will pick up the green sheet, as we call them, and we can then move to the closed session we have scheduled.
You're looking for a motion? Is that what you're doing?
Yes.
Go ahead, John.
I move to recess the work session and enter the closed session pursuant to NCGS Section 143-318.11A3 to consult with an attorney employed or retained by the public body in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the public body, which privilege is hereby acknowledged. The parties to the lawsuit being discussed are NC Citizens and the Village of Pinehurst.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We're going to be going to a closed session, so, thank you. Well, the comments